those two announcements, and then with that, I'd like to introduce Ali Khan, who has been to the Summer Institute many times. You've already heard his remark earlier today, so you know that he's equipped to talk about the most technical developments in economics, but also he's got a really interesting way to present the ideas that are behind those with the Boston. So Ali Khan from Johns Hopkins is going to now talk to us. We're going to go back in time a little bit to the 18th century. So welcome, Ali.
Thank you. So I'm delighted to be here. But I miss Jim Buchanan, and for I think at least 4 times I was his roommate in what is the name of the house? Bottom. So I think it is only fitting that I have been upgraded or downgraded or regraded to Lakeview Place. So my memories of Jim Buchanan and of Bottomley House can remain intact. So this topic was chosen for me by David Levy. But the title was chosen by me. And Mitch has already commented on the title. He said, we are finally going to have Derrida. So this is to be an essay on Condillac, and through him on the economics of the 18th century. But what I am now doing is delivering a talk, and in particular a talk at the Summer Institute. And to get even more particular, a talk at the Summer Institute that succeeds foreign diplomacy. The word talk is important because it's not a lecture, it's a talk. So what's the difference between a paper, an essay, a talk, a lecture? So how should I compose this talk? So Sandy has already talked of controlling the talk. But talk by itself cannot be fully controlled. But we have time, or I have time. So I am interested in Condillac for many reasons. So when David Levy chose this topic for me, he already knew I was interested in Condillac for many reasons. Some of those reasons, a listing of the reasons. Language. Mathematics as language. Language as mathematics. He has a piece on the land to calcul. So he was interested in the calculus. You see, he was interested in Leibniz and in Newton. So he was interested in the calculus. I am interested in Condillac for theorizing, for the activity of theorizing. I am interested in Condillac also for his economics, not that much for his economics. Maybe for now that the subject is enraged, interested in political economy. Remember, Condillac has a volume on commerce and government, commerce in the 18th century sense of the term. It's an interesting title, Commerce and Government Considered in Their Mutual Relationship. I'm interested in Condillac for his interest in pedagogy. When you are investigating how you theorize, you are concomitantly investigating how do you communicate what you theorize, which is to say, what you teach. So pedagogy is essential. And then, of course, I am interested in how this, from my point of view, neglected figure comports with other 18th century figures. So I am interested in Condillac. So how does one read Condillac? So in particular, you see, if you had to take in, this is, I think literary critics call it, I don't know how to pronounce it, what is it? Synecdoche. Okay. So this is supposed to be a synecdoche of his work. If I had to pile it all, it would be big, much bigger. And if I had to pile up all Adam Smith's work, much, much bigger.
He burned it.
So how does one read this work? Well, it's a slim volume with a figure of a rose and a statue. And this is Derrida on the archaeology of the frivolous. Frivolous!
Thank you for pointing to me.
The archaeology of the frivolous, reading Condillac. So I read Condillac through Derrida. But how do I read Derrida? And then to complicate the matter, I would like to dedicate this essay, maybe even this talk, to Jim Buchanan. So, what has Jim Buchanan got to do with Derrida? And so, it is complicated. So let me tell you how do I read Derrida. I don't read Derrida through Condillac. That would be a tautology. It would be some sort of equality. These are substantive terms for what I am talking to you about today. Tautology, equality, identity, self-evidence. So I don't read Derrida through Condillac. Oh, I cannot read. That's not a meaningful operation. I read Condillac reading Derrida through a figure you would not suspect, the figure which goes to the heart of spontaneity, the figure of André Gide. So now I have a listing, partial listing of names. It takes time, otherwise I would write those names. The names are Buchanan, Gide, Derrida, I already named Leibniz, Condillac. But you name Leibniz and Condillac, you name implicitly Locke. These are the interpreters of Locke. And then when you name Locke and Leibniz and Condillac and Diderot, you name Marx. So there's a listing of names. So let's get to Jeet. So this is interesting. This is an 1895 work. It's not a well-known work. And Lauren already talked of confusion. This work is translated as marshlands. As swamps. Swamps. You are swamped. You are swamped by reality. You are swamped by what you want to theorize. You are not clear. So this marshlands begins with this sentence. And I don't know French.
Did I write this satire or what?
That's what it says.
Yes.
I wrote this.
Oh, I write or I wrote?
I write, actually I wrote.
I write.
I write.
I write this satire or what?
Yeah.
So we now have two translations.
It's present tense.
It's present tense.
I said present first.
You said first. Oh, see,
And I'd like to do
one way to control, one way to control a room, an economy, is to start competition. Use the springs of competition as control. But let us continue. This translation, this original has a translation by the translation, and there's George Pinter's 1950 translation. And he doesn't say the present, he says the past. I wrote this, he doesn't say satire, he says essay. Then he says on what? And Thomas cites this novel as a leap into fully fledged art, a swift advance from diffusion to concentration, a precise masterpiece of sarcasm and fervor. See, I told you, frivolous. Precise
Sarcasm.
and fervor, wit and seriousness, self-satire and proselytize, oh, today's impossible. Zeal. The faceted diamond of a classic art. Okay. Now maybe I don't have as much time as I thought. Right? So, I will take, how do you divide it? I speak for an hour and then we open.
That sounds fine. Yeah.
So, after this is a dedication to a friend. After this dedication, there is an epigraph. This epigraph will already tell you what I want to talk about. But you say, what do you want to talk about? And I say, I already told you I'm interested in Condillac. What I want to talk about is to connect. Someone talked of transparency. So, I want to connect to my work on theorizing, which again was inspired by David Levy when he wanted me to present it to the ethics panel at the American Statistical Association about 15 years ago, or several years ago. The paper still remains unpublished. But there I want to connect. I want to connect them. I am also interested in connecting it to the economics, and in particular to a theme already mentioned this morning, to this 19th century idea of the distinction between needs and desires. But above all, in this talk, I want to communicate to you the difficulty and the fruitfulness and the modernity of reading Condillac. And to that extent, this epigraph of Gide already shows you where I am going. So what is this epigraph? And this I don't say in French, I have the French lower down. This says, before I explain my book to others, I am waiting for others to explain it to me. To explain it beforehand would be to restrict its sense. Great novelists never talk about their novel by and large, I am told. And great painters don't discuss their painting by and large, I am told. But we began with translation. And I don't know French, but I know that the original translation of painters is quote unquote, there is no wrong and right in this, it is not appropriate. It is inappropriate. Why is it inappropriate? Because the original, the translation George Painter has translated sans. Is it sans? S-E-N-S, sans, as meaning, which is not the sense is very important for him. In particular, the sense is very important because sense, if you look up sense, I didn't know what sense because I don't know French, so I looked at the dictionary of French. It's very nice databases in Hopkins on dictionary of French. So I get the whole dictionary, how the word has evolved. And this dictionary, the 8th edition, Dictionary Académique Française, whatever, faculty and animaux, and impressions, and the 5 senses. Painter has also capitalized the word scribe, but I'm running ahead of my story. But these 5 senses, why these 5 senses? Guess why? Mr. Condillac has a book, Treatise on the Senses. So it's very important how this word S-E-N-S is translated for me. It cannot be translated as meaning. It would not be appropriate for what I want to talk about. But let us continue. So we would be restricting not its sense, not its meaning, but its sense. For though we may know what we intended to say, we do not know if that was all that we actually have been saying. So this idea of misfiring, of an excess, of supplementation, of not being able to hit its target, of not being able to communicate, always over-communicating or under-communicating. It is an essential aspect, I would say, of theorizing. And that is what André Gide is going towards. One always says more than just that. I pointed to you when I used the word frivolous.
I noticed.
But if you then turned around to me and said, what do you mean by frivolous? I would oversay or undersay, something you know very well. And what interests me most in my book is what I have put in it without being aware of it. The part that belongs to the unconscious, which I should like to call the part that belongs to God. A book is always a collaboration. And the smaller the part of the scribe, the more room there will be to welcome God, and the greater will be its value. Let us await from everywhere the revelation of things. That's what theorizing is all about, the revelation of things. from the public the revelation of our works. I'm dumping a little bit on Mr. George Painter's translations. He capitalizes scribe, but G did not capitalize scribe. G did capitalize God. And so now let me read from what I have to say. And the track of this, my reading, becomes, there's a typo, I've been rushing, becomes even more diffused and complicated once the dedication of this essay to James Buchanan is taken, as I think it ought to be taken, seriously rather than frivolously. We have yet to find out what this frivolous means. I don't know French, but I know English even less. Its seriousness is underscored by the recent piece of Brennan Munger, also dedicated to Buchanan, entitled The Soul of James Buchanan. And I read now. That's why perhaps I shall now dedicate this talk to James Buchanan. We learn many things from Jim Buchanan. Among the more important is that titles should be felicitous. Ours here is ambitious, perhaps presumptuous, even slightly mischievous. Our point of departure is Buchanan's paper, again a typo. The leap from the soul of classical liberalism to the soul of one of classic liberalism's chief expositors and defenders strikes us as natural. These are all very important words for my reading. The truth is that for Buchanan, a reference to souls is decidedly out of character. The term connotes religion, and Jim was antagonistic towards religion of all kinds. His opposition was not just to organized religion, he was, if possible, even less sympathetic to unorganized populist mystics or New Age period. And my very first conversation across the dinner table after Liberty Fund meeting with Jim Buchanan began with his running down in front of me what the Muslims were up to and how they were interpreting the Quran. And I turned around and I said, what do you know about the Quran? He said, Ali, now that you ask me, I know nothing. And then began a friendship. And yes, to be sure, the first of two parts of the essay, you will notice I have already begun reading Condillac. The first two parts of the essay on the origin of human knowledge concerns the materials of our knowledge and especially the operations of the soul. Nevertheless, the question does arise, and one hopes it to be a natural and hopefully not a frivolous question. What have felicity and mischief to do with frivolity? And all three to do with the operations of the soul. So now my prefatory note to my essay is in place. So I don't want to get this impression of talking to myself in one of these savant, noble savage type of ways. So if you'd like to have some questions, I would welcome them at this point. I have time. I sense, Lord, maybe you don't, that the mood has changed.
It's because Sandy is firmly enthroned.
It's all her fault.
She's such a killjoy. It's always
You haven't said anything yet.
And so I get one comment instead of a question. You haven't said anything yet. So why is everyone silent? Yes.
All right. So,
Don't fall safe.
minimum. So you're obviously begging this operation to the soul. We know Condillac was originally a theology student.
Modern theory of priest, obey.
So why, supposedly we're dealing with issues of intellect, what does the soul got to do with intellect?
What a wonderful gesture with the words. What is the soul got to do? In my culture, when you cannot answer a question, you repeat it. And believe it or not, after some time, people lose control. Because you keep repeating that line. You keep repeating that line. So what has the soul? Okay.
So I've got a question.
Yes.
So, I still don't understand, why should we care about Derrida reading Condillac? I think I understand a little bit about the Gide thing, and about how you can get the Condillac from that. Some of the issues I talked about that, but I don't understand, aside from the fact that Derrida wrote this book and seems fun, I don't understand substantive reason for caring about Derrida reading Condillac.
One more thing. With age, one goes back more and more into one's own culture. So one more thing from the culture. From the book that I read, we created man impatient. Be patient. I just began. I said, I'm interested in Condillac, not Derrida. I want to understand Condillac. The work is a lot. I find this pamphlet. I said, maybe this pamphlet will be the lever. This pamphlet is slight. But I can't understand the pamphlet. So I go to Gide. And then I have to give a talk.
And you can't explain it till the end.
For Jim Buchanan. So where is it going? Well, where it is going is I want to talk of theorizing. And I want to talk of this needs versus desires. So yeah, this is a problem. So it has to be brought to some sort of fruition. I would not want Rich to leave this room saying, what a complete waste of time.
Ali, why not?
Because I care for the man.
Good.
Not because it's of utilitarian value to me. I care. And therefore I care for his time. As I care for everyone else's time.
Actually, utilitarian.
Care.
For everyone. Yep.
That's true. Everybody aggregation.
Yeah.
But I'm going to be diverted.
All right.
So, which I respond better. In a sense, I respond better by underscoring what you are saying. So let's underscore it. And the underscoring takes a more impatient form of which is impatience. Say, get on with the bloody thing. If I am not to get bogged down into a preparation for a preparation, in forever getting ready for the task at hand, rather than engaging in the task, a further question and an answer to it must suffice. And this is again directed to the first talk. What role is there in individualism of the concept of play, of hedonism? You brought the word hedonism. The concept of play, deriving from the nature of art as play, as the principle of pleasure in its most refined form. So I'm getting ready towards spontaneity, so still towards Gide. I haven't got to Derrida and I haven't got to Condillac. Still through Gide. But why Gide? You say, I see already the relevance of Gide. Something like that you said. And I don't know what it is that you see in Gide, that you are willing to at least grant me the relevance of Gide to Condillac, but not Derrida. And I would suggest to you what you perhaps already know, that what you see in Gide is the act gratuit. So what is the act gratuit? Act gratuit. So let's again go to the footnote to understand the text. A trio of serio-comic works dealing with the act gratuit as a principle of conduct, not rationality as the principle of conduct, spontaneity as the principle of conduct. And what is that? That's act gratuit. The presentation of the idea develops from insinuation in Paludes through exaltation in Prometheus Unbound to its climax of exemplification in the caves of Vatican. And after that, by 1924, Gide has dropped the subject. So this goes to my title. So, I again pause here for questions. Even questions like, no, the question already been asked, where are you going? Hurry up. So not that question, but some other questions. So the idea I want to now get at in this act gratuit, I bracket. This we understand, spontaneous act, but non-purposive, non-calculative, taken on the spur of the moment. In Jim Conrad, in Joseph Conrad. Joseph Conrad. In Joseph Conrad, Lord Jim jumps. It is a gratuitous act. He jumps. He doesn't premeditate. So let's leave this. Let's bracket. Let us go back to this idea. Not go back, but let us broach the idea. So this is in some sense partly an answer. Not really an answer. It's moving towards an answer. I could go in several directions, but this requires more space and time than I possess, blah, blah. I shall therefore limit myself 3 footnotes of Derrida. And read them in the light of what I see to be their basic thrust as regards my subject. My subject is not Derrida. My subject is Condillac. So I will now go to this. And I want to do it in a much more, in less oblique and a much more direct way. And I think this is the part that I will take about 20 minutes. And I will need your attention for 20 minutes. And then you will see where I am going. And you will see the relevance of Derrida. But it is a rather sustained part. It is about as close, since Laurent talked of we and us and them and so on, it's as close as economists get to philosophy. So let's go about it very slowly. So how does Derrida read the essay? I have 2 things. The treatise, I will forget the treatise on animals. The treatise on sensation and the essay on the origin of human knowledge. How does Derrida read the origin of human knowledge? And he reads the essay as essentially determining the meaning of one word. And that word, all the problems of the essay are spread out between the 2 senses of the word imagination. So I already warned you about understanding the English. So I would like you to think now what you mean by the word imagination. As native speakers of the language, some of you are. The very force of Derrida's 5-part reading of Condillac lies in his 3rd part, titled imagination. So this pamphlet is divided into 5 parts. The 3rd of it is called imagining.
Can I put out something real quick? I think there's some really interesting ambiguity you're talking about Condillac and raising the issue of senses. You know, what is meant by senses here?
Thank you.
Two senses.
I worked hard.
Saying.
This is, I worked hard. I worked hard. Yes, thank you. I appreciate it. That translation, that mistranslation is very important. But all theory is mistranslation. All theory is trying to do what you know you cannot do. So one of the reasons I'm interested in Condillac is I have a little essay in 1990s called The Irony of Economic Theory. Actually, it's titled The Irony in and Off of Economic Theory. And it is this impulse. So that you're absolutely on. We are at one on this. Any other comment? Yes.
I'm not sure about this mistranslation in the phrase in Gilles, because there, from the sentence you quoted, it's really meaning. Sense would really translate it by meaning, not by the senses, but by meaning.
So you both have a disagreement which you should perhaps resolve over coffee. On your own time. On your own time.
So maybe in Condillac that's something else, but in Gilles at the end of the 19th century, the word sense in French has the meaning.
And you have a third. We have a seminar, a symposium right here, but not on my time. On your own time. I am laying out my cards as I see them. So, but you see them all wrong? Yes, all wrong. But at least allow me to show you what I see. So the third part, to return to which, the third part is imagining conceptual stand-in and the novel of force. I have no idea what this means, but there's a title. So one needs to go to Derrida's original in French, and you must appreciate my difficulty. I don't know French, much less of now than of the past, so I am lost it here. But this is the title. But this title, as Mitch says, Mitch put it very well, is both of procedural and substantive consequence. That mistranslation which you are seeing in me is both of procedural and substantive consequence. Okay. Now I want to, I know this is not what I want to show you. This is not what I want. So again, this is quick. The third part of this 5-part essay, this is what I do. The third part, I'm still on the third part of the 5-part essay. Then on imagining, he highlights his subject's lineage in relation to himself, the progress of his own thought, first within the essay, then from the essay to subsequent works, in particular to the treatise. Condillac multiplies the considerations of history in his own discourse. So the history of his own discourse, he is self-exploring. He is looking at himself. He does not hold these considerations of history in his own discourse as marginal. When I went back to my 1995 essay, I am looking at the history of my own discourse, and I don't believe this to be marginal. They must be part of the discourse itself, which, marking out the trail, must be recounted, must explain its steps, if not its faux pas. The rules it followed or those it should have followed. So this is, I am now identifying as a special operation of theorizing. And I am therefore, through Derrida, citing Condillac as a first-rate theorist, as a theorist who's self-reflexive, who sees whether the theory he is propounding applies to herself. So this idea of recounting, counting up yet again what one has already counted, the work reflecting on itself, learning and explaining itself, and thereby constituting itself, projecting a constitution that has already taken cognizance of its strengths and weaknesses, and thereby transcending them. And in this transcendence, discovering itself is an eminently modern idea. So if there's a theorem in this paper, you don't like mathematics. If there's a theorem in this paper, this is the theorem. But let me go to Condillac's passage that Derrida's reading highlights. This is fascinating. This is fascinating. So, with regard to philosophic works, nothing but order will enable an author to perceive some things that have been forgotten, or others that have not been sufficiently examined. You see, this business of looking at one's own work and recounting it, re-examining it, re-examining it in the light of where you now stand as opposed to where you first wrote it. This I have often myself experienced. The present essay was finished, and yet I did not even then understand the principle of the connection of ideas in its full extent. So he wrote it, he didn't understand it. This was owing entirely to a passage of about 2 pages, which was not in its right place. So here is a reading. So now you ask me, why did you bring Derrida? I hope you are getting some answer. So these 2 pages are missing, he says. No, not missing. They were misplaced. The work to really become the work he wanted it to become needs to be ordered so that these 2 pages are put in the right place. The misordering is corrected. It is reordered. What are these 2 pages? Derrida doesn't tell us. I mean, no, Condillac doesn't tell us. That was interesting slip, don't you think? The fact that a finished work is commented on in its own finishing, as well as the fact that the missing 2 pages are not indicated, and thereby rendered a completed work incomplete, drives, I am from Pakistan, so I tend to exaggerate, drives Derrida wild. Derrida goes wild. What is the status of this remark? Inscribed in the book only when the present essay, for example, was finished. Condillac never retouched the essay. What 2 pages are these? Why doesn't Condillac tell us? If these pages here are made to open and not close our reading, must we stop at this point? So I now believe I have answered your question. Why are you bringing Derrida into Condillac? This one. Must we stop at this point? Let's see how much time I have. Our time goes very slowly. When you are reading passages such as these, and with all the silence. This is very important. I mean, the guy really goes wild. He says, we must stop at this. What does he say? Must we stop at this point? And you know, anybody who says, must we stop at this point, never stops at that point. Derrida, of course, doesn't stop. He goes wide. He starts writing long footnotes. Indeed, once alerted, Derrida cannot stop. He now hunts of all of his work to what other pages have been removed. And he finds Derrida removed pages from the dictionary of synonyms. Which pages? I won't tell you. But Derrida knows. So this which Derrida is doing archival work on Condillac, how can I ignore him? So, which said, why are you bringing Derrida indeed? I hope by the end of this talk, which will say, how can anybody not bring Derrida indeed? Indeed, once alerted, I said, it goes rather. Then after he finishes the footnote, he says, the case is rare and significant. This is ominous. But let me go to Derrida's footnote. Here is the place to remark other missing or previously removed pages. The two signatures of the dictionary of synonyms. I will now not labor my French. I will just translate for you. They disappeared under conditions which make an accidental disappearance less likely. These signatures might have contained the definition of sign. So the pages on sign are removed. This is what frivolity means. This is being frivolous in a meaningful sense. But also such nouns beginning with S which hold so many others in their necks. So this is a very interesting translation, in their necks. So it's like fishing, words as necks. But fees I think means children, sons. So immediately adjacent to science and sign are sense, sensation, sentiment, sentir. So you see, what you correct is very important. My entire reading has to be corrected in here. Because the problem, this whole business of substituting sense for meaning can be very nonsensible. Now what happens? We must take our breath. I must interrupt the footnote. How can words not in the dictionary become the signature words of the dictionary? You understand what I'm trying to say? Here is the place to remark other missing, to remark. This is a very interesting colloquialism. It's from the French. To remark, to mark again, to note, to remark other missing or previously removed pages. The two signatures of the dictionary. He's saying these two were the two, science and science are the two signatures of the dictionary. But they are not in the dictionary. So how do you decide they are the signatures of the dictionary? Derrida has decided. On what basis has he decided? It is to decide on presence through an absence. Because the pages are missing. Perhaps this is the signature of Derrida himself. Or to put the matter less fancifully or less frivolously, Derrida has already decided on science and science as fundamental terms in Condillac's discourse. This part of the footnote seems already to constitute, if not a finished reading, an essential thrust on what would emerge as a definitive reading of Condillac's prose. So I would now say, you are saying, why are you bringing in Derrida to understand Condillac? I would now be more assertive. You cannot understand Condillac without understanding Derrida. And because by you, I mean the mainstream, the academic mainstream have been frightened of Derrida, you have not understood Condillac. That's the thing. Yes?
Okay, I have not read Condillac, so I...
you come fresh to the subject.
But I'm just trying to follow your argument here, and it occurs to me, I have read Derrida somewhat, although he's kind of Martian. But it occurs to me, thinking about his views, that perhaps why he thinks this removal of these particular pages is important has to do with problems of self-referencing, which, now this is way ahead of what came later, but especially when we get to 20th century logic, and we have all these problems of logic and incomplete systems and so on, and issues of self-referencing are involved in the paradoxes that I know you're very well aware of. Is this what's going on? Is this where you're heading? Is this what you think Derrida is making a point about? Is this it? That Condillac has removed these passages because they're so fundamental, because they would lead to some inevitable loop of self-referencing that would render his work incoherent? Is that what's going on?
He has taken the baton from you. Yeah. So this business, let me see, let me answer. Let me answer a polished comment in a polished way. And polished means I should hunt. I have a sentence. Partly I will show you. So, but this is whole question of, you say, is that where you are going? And I have an extended thing about, I don't know where I am going. And rather than just say, but in a sense that is where I am going. I already told you where I am going. I am recounting, re-examining, self-referencing my poor little essay on the irony of economic theory. And I find Derrida important for this, because I find him to be a first-rate theorist in the modern sense of the term that you specify. And I got so emboldened by all of this that I wrote to two Adam Smith scholars that I know, one of whom is here and the other one was supposed to be here but has fallen sick. And I said, you know, compared to Adam Smith, this guy is a real philosopher. Was Adam Smith really self-reflexive? And I tell you, I got a load of emails pointing out what I should read about Adam Smith. So there's a lot to what you're saying.
I just want to clarify something, which I'm still not persuaded I need to read
Derrida.
or I can just, why I just can't read Condillac with the pages ripped out. But
What you can write? The pages are written out. How will you read them? You wouldn't even have known that the pages are written out if you had not read Derrida.
what I want to clarify, there's that
This is
statement.
going wild.
There's the statement here from Derrida, no, the state, they disappeared under conditions which make an accidental disappearance less likely. Then there's a footnote 5. What is meant there by disappeared under conditions? What were the, yeah, footnote 5. So
Is that what he's asking?
Yes. Yeah, what are the conditions under which they disappeared to make an accidental less likely?
Self-confession.
What?
I give you a self-confession. That footnote 5 is my footnote.
Okay, so what is your interpretation of what Derrida is referring to?
Does he want my footnote?
Yes.
Oh, that's what you want. Why don't you speak clearly? I see. So,
Let me put it this way.
see, so he's recounting, rephrasing.
There are two ways of looking at this. One is, okay, these pages are missing, so something must be going on, and it's unlikely they're accidental. Or there's something not stated here about the conditions under which they disappeared that you haven't explained to me, Derrida maybe not explained to me, that we would want to know about that makes it, less likely that they were accidental.
What are you hiding?
Yeah.
What are you hiding?
And what is Derrida hiding?
Right, yes.
Yes.
But then he's already reading Derrida. Once you ask
This is not a
somebody,
footnote or a footnote. The Germans invented footnotes in the 19th century. They had footnotes on footnotes on footnotes on footnotes, and we stopped doing that. This is not a footnote or a footnote.
yeah, LaTeX does not allow that. LaTeX does not allow it. That is true.
Only mathematicians use that.
So the footnote, my poor footnote. Let us see, I've forgotten what I wrote. Oh, this is innocent footnote. This is innocent footnote. This explication, you have to go to the editor of Condillac's works, 3-volume work, Georges Leroy. So he says the conditions. So he obviously knows. Both Derrida and I are innocent on this charge. He knows what are those conditions. But he concludes that it was not accidental. So I don't believe him, but then it's him we don't believe.
But is it where you come up with all kinds of possibilities?
Oh,
Maybe somebody put a gun to Condillac and
Oh,
said about these pages, or
all kind. The fact of the matter is, sense is a very important word for Condillac. He has a treatise on the senses. He is an a sensationalist. He is a materialist sensationalist. And he removed these 2 pages. These 2 pages were removed. And whether you like Derrida or don't like Derrida, or whether you are willfully not going to read Derrida, the fact is Derrida pointed this out. You say, but this is of no consequence. Then I have little to say to you. Okay, so I have to conclude. This is not working out. This is not working out. But this is not working out partly because of Jim Buchanan. Because I want this essay to be a very serious, not frivolous, serious thing on spontaneity. So, and I eventually want to go from all of this business to needs and desires and then to commerce and government. So that's the trajectory. That's where I'm going. Apart from my own self-referencing and so on. So is there anything else that is worth saying?
I think in the sense of play and spontaneity, you can keep your own mistranslation in there. You're safe, and then you can expound on your thoughts on French philosophers.
So I will take what you suggest into account. But let me now finish. No, let me now finish. You see, throughout which it is a listing. I'm listing 5 things, listing names and so on, and the listing conditions, where I'm going. And I would like to conclude with this statement. You now have some rough idea of how I'm going to waste my time in the next 2 weeks. I'm going to try and finish this essay. There's a Condillac footnote, by the way. And this is a very important footnote. This is another story, we don't have time. Not only are those 2 pages missing, Condillac does a footnote, and Derrida focuses on that footnote. So I didn't really expect to make you into a deconstructionist, but you must give me some credit for trying. So the footnote, of course, he goes into that, and then he goes into the order, and so on. We have a lot we could talk about a lot, but I want to put this here, and actually it's good here because I miss Eric Schließer, and his name is in this passage. The list is not yet complete, and a partial listing, insofar as it suggests completion. I counseled patience. So, if you want a partial listing, insofar as it suggests completion, interferes with the completion, frustrates and jinxes the very attempt at completion. Perhaps the incomplete should remain just that, incomplete, to be potentially completed, to be completed only in time. So in a sense, this is a very anti-teleological statement. This attempt is hardly one of fulfillment. At any rate, the point is that the attempt at completion has been initiated. And then this process can be laid, I wrote in Eric's store. Now you want confession, so I will give you another self-confession. This is cut and paste from an email. So, as soon as you represent a process and a mode of operation, as soon as you call an economy an arrow-de-bro economy, or an economy with a continuum of traders, you reify the mode of operation and thereby ask for it to be transcended and superseded by an extended operation, by a supplementation. In Condillac's terms, you turn the effervescence of a rose into the immobility and fixity of a statue. You make the reality into a model. So that is why, that is the reading of Condillac. So how do you theorize? You make a model. You make an effervescence of a rose into the immobility and fixity of the statue, and then I will connect to G, etc., etc. But I think this will be a good point of finish. Thank you.
There are a lot of comments that work my notes. I'll start here and then find my way up.
This is fascinating. I think there's a deep connection with Jim's work that goes through Rutledge Vining's question, improvements, which is where's the econometrician and the econometrician's model. And one of the things we'll do tomorrow is we'll show a letter from Jim to the Ford Foundation saying, look, this is the Virginia school is my, this is my needs, it's not compliance. And I think maybe one of the question of where's the theorist in the process is central to the night binding canon way of thinking. So I think it's totally appropriate that you're doing like a binding of the canon thing on this sort of what seems otherwise to be just sort of a logical exercise. That's silly, but I think that's in some deep sense it's where the engineer project began, defining this question.
Thank you.
I just want to summarize what I think was for you, which is economists should be more humble, especially economic theorists.
Thank you. I have a question on that. Am I supposed to answer this? Yes, I would like to answer this before. Is that an approbation for my humility, or is this a charge of hubris? I can't make out.
It has nothing to do with you. It has to do with the information you're passing to us, which I think is deep and was beautifully passed, which is here, there are so many levels that you can go further and further into it, that no matter what you understand, you do not understand it. Unless you understand that, forget it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ollie, I'm not sure quite what the connection is, but I think there may be one, and that is that my memory is that Frank Knight stressed the importance of play in economic activity, and that had been totally lost by economic theorists.
Nice. Oh, really? Oh, that's fascinating. Okay, I didn't know. Okay, that's fascinating. All three comments. This is fascinating. I see. I see. Okay, then. I'll be back to you on that. I don't make Sandy walk.
Thank you. Two comments about your paper. One that kind of echoes the report about economists need to be more humble. As you were going through your paper, I thought, well, you know, this is why economists turn to math. Okay, so we could be precise and we'd all be talking about the same thing and we'd understand what we were talking about. But then I wrote down my interpretation of what you were saying, whether expressed in mathematical symbology or verbally, theory fails to convey what it means. So that came as a bit of a revelation to me. Thank you for that. And secondly, I like spontaneity, but I'm big on purpose, so I have to ask you to explain. You can't accept purpose matters, right? Purpose and spontaneity, the economics of the 18th century. This is your title, colon. On reading Derrida or Derrida, reading Condillac. Would you please relate the part about reading Derrida, reading Condillac to the first part of your title, Purpose and Spontaneity in Economics of the 18th Century? I'm not sure what the connection is, and like I said, I'm bad at making those connections up. Thank you.
By the way, the word connection is a supremely important word for economics. But Mitch, this is not your question, right? The second is not your question. You asked what has Derrida got to do with it. She is asking what purpose and spontaneity have to do with
Derrida reading.
No. You are asking what, so what have purpose and spontaneity to do with Condillac? Let's first, you see, you understand a big sentence by parsing it, by stripping it down. So what has spontaneity and purpose got to do with reading Condillac? I will be very brief. Now we go 2 minutes, so I will very brief answer. This is of supreme, again, very great consequence for this. This essay is not yet complete. It is trying to become complete. So, this idea of which comes first, the expression of the idea, or the idea comes first, or the expression comes first? Or do you first express and then ideas come? So there is this question of sequentiality. And G is on one side of the sequentiality. and Derrida is on the opposite, Condillac is on the opposite side, very clearly on the opposite side. In that sense, he is not an idealist, he's a sensational philosopher, because everything comes from the sensation. And so, one of the names which I listed was Derrida. So you say, why did you throw in Derrida? Because Derrida has a letter on the blind for the use of those who can see. It's very complicated. We can talk a lot about this. So let me not continue.
Thanks. Last question.
So I've got two questions. So the first one,
I'm still reeling from the first question.
I want to see if I understand what you write about why you quoted G, and I want to try this. And your section 8, the connection to Wittgenstein, I'm not sure that was blank, but I want to see if I understand maybe the connection you're trying to make. And this is, I think you told us that this is not a complete paper. And what I want to try
More than once. All the time.
But no paper is.
If I'm interpreting G correctly, that's a question for us to decide, not for you to decide. So you can't whether you think it's complete or not.
You notice I at once came around here.
Frivolous. It's manifestations.
But my other, I think so if what you're saying is what Derrida is contributing to understanding Condillac is basically basing everything on the senses, that's sort of as simple as given, but then the senses themselves can be questioned, and he sort of can't go underneath that. I mean, that makes sense to me. If that's what you're saying, then why do we need to go to Derrida to do that? Maybe, but that makes sense to me. That's all I want to say. Yeah.
Let me just say one sentence. This is a cliche which my students get upset now with but I start my course on the Arrow-Debreu model by asking two questions. What's the difference between an economy, a society, a community, and a polity? And then I say, what is an economy? You don't see an economy walking around. You don't touch it. You don't feel it. And the man is talking of feelings, throughout talking of feelings. And then he writes a book on commerce and government. There is some explaining to do. In keeping with so-called Adam Smith problem, which Germans have written on, there is a Condillac problem for me, and it is this problem.